Hello, welcome to the Pop Culture Show. I'm happier than I should be because this really is a heavy episode. This is going to be our Pop Culture tribute episode to David Lynch, and me, Lilith Dorsey, and my co-host.
Jason Winslade.
We have a special love in our heart for David Lynch and all things Lynchian. I feel like we're certainly of a certain age. We were at that time when Lynch was really becoming uber popular and sort of skyrocketing from this cult figure to someone who was on our TV screens, once a week. It was amazing and fantastic. So we're going to talk the magic of David Lynch. We're going to talk the mystery of David Lynch. Somebody I saw called him the weirdo's weirdo. And I think that's very apt and fitting because, as we say a lot here, we are the weirdos. And so this was our weirdo's weirdo, our weirdo director, the one who was stranger than strange. And I mean, there's just so much to talk about, right? Like, I want to start off with something that has always stuck in my head, though. There was a scene, well, several scenes in Blue Velvet where Dennis Hopper is, on the mask huffing nitrous oxide, right? Like that's what it was. Dennis thought it was supposed to be. That's whatever. He said he had a conversation with Lynch, and Lynch wanted it to be oxygen. And I was like, wow, that would have put a whole different spin on the character. He was just constantly gasping for oxygen and couldn't breathe. But, there's so many of those things that we think, oh, all right, this is what it's going to be. And Lynch just comes at us from the strangest stratosphere, other planet of wonderful weirdo-ness. And I deeply appreciate it. I really do. Everything that he's ever done, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so we just found out yesterday. He died at 78, emphysema, lifelong smoker. And by the time you see this, it'll be about a week, I think, since he's left us. And I was immediately, in the middle of my day, just stopped in my tracks by this news. But he did have a huge impact on my creative inner life, like so many, like you said, of our generation. I mean, it was his presence was huge in my college days, and I was hanging out with the avant-garde film crowds at Notre Dame, which, believe it or not, there were avant-garde film crowds at Notre Dame. But yeah, and it wasn't until college that I saw Eraserhead, which came out in '77. And what's funny is that my first David Lynch film, my mother took me to, and that was The Elephant Man in 1980, which is Lynch's probably most mainstream film. Got all kinds of Oscar nominations. John Hurt, of course, in the title role. Anthony Hopkins, incredible cast. 1980, I saw that in the theater, and then of course Dune, because we were huge, sci-fi fans, and seeing Frank Herbert's Dune brought to life to the screen by David Lynch, although he of course disowns it now. And it was a flop at the time. It has definitely grown in people's estimation since that time, and it's retained its cult classic sense. Even with the new movie that came out, people still have an affinity for Lynch's Dune. But it wasn't really until later high school and into college, I saw Blue Velvet, which was a revelation. And then, Wild at Heart, when that first came out in the theater. And of course, that's an adaptation. That wasn't one of Lynch's original scripts, but he, of course, adapted it quite thoroughly. And yeah, I didn't really stick with it. I mean, I saw Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and I didn't see Inland Empire or The Straight Story, but I hope to soon. And of course, Twin Peaks, and that's a lot of what I think we'll probably talk about today, because it has, of all of Lynch's work, has the most sort of occult qualities to it. But yet there are sort of threads that connect the films, I think, through some of the mythos of Twin Peaks in a lot of ways. the Lynchian world is a huge part of who we are, I think, as creatives, coming of age in the 80s and 90s. So you can't possibly talk about the avant-garde or art films or the avant-garde art scene in general without thinking of David Lynch in some way, shape, or form. I find it interesting that he died around the same time 9 years later as Bowie did, and I kind of put those two together in a lot of ways. I mean, Bowie was in Fire Walk with Me, and there was definitely, I think, a connection. There was clearly a bond between the two of them. So yeah, I think that's, Lynch is in that pantheon.
Oh, definitely. I am a super fan. I wore my, let me get this off of here. Look, I didn't even close it. I wore my smoking David Lynch earrings today.
Yep.
I have my Fat Trout Trailer Park T-shirt on. I'm not wearing my David Bowie and David Lynch T-shirt, but I do have it somewhere. I think I've worn it so much it's all completely like frayed down, and there's holes in it. And I probably put it in a safe place, which once you put stuff in a safe place, you can't find it.
My David Lynch outfit is very similar to my Rod Serling outfit. So
It is. I was gonna
and there is a
say,
connection there, obviously.
yeah, it's iconic. It's iconic, no matter how you get it together. But for me, and I think it's interesting you brought up that point about David Bowie, because for me, his work sort of manipulates time and space in a beautiful way, and what we expect and what we think are norms and conformity. He sort of breaks out of all those boxes and lets us see things in a different way. I did write about Twin Peaks on my blog, Voodoo Universe, before the reboot of Twin Peaks. And I talked about how there's this way in which he's always in that liminal space. And I think you can see this even in Blue Velvet. You can see it in Mulholland Drive. You can see it in Wild at Heart. Like, I'm thinking of all those great shots of like of the highway, right? Like Lost Highway, that we're just going down this highway, and like it's this in between space, and we don't know where it is, and we don't know what's going to happen. We don't even really know. It's bad enough we don't know where it is in space, but we don't know where it is in time either. And when I was in film school, I used to get in trouble all the time. They're like, this isn't linear time. It doesn't have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And then I was like, ha ha, look at David Lynch, because nothing in that has a beginning and a middle and an end, I'm very sad now that we'll probably never get to know the truth about Lil and the Blue Roses from Fire Walk with Me. That was the, big question. And I heard somebody also mention that he liked to ask these questions all the time, that he was all about more and more and more questions. And for me, I think that's the hallmark of a great artist. We're not making anything in a definitive statement. We're pushing the box. We're expanding our consciousness and asking more questions. And that's really a magical way of thinking too. I know that he didn't necessarily, other than Eastern philosophy and Zen, he didn't really speak about magic the way we usually talk about it here on the Pop Occulture show. But there are a lot of parallels, I think, that come in and out, and we can see those crossroads in a lot of Lynch's work.
Well, I think there are some specific occulty things, I think, going on. I think in the same way that when you have someone like Alan Moore talking about the collective unconscious and kind of these Jungian ideas and symbol systems and things like that, that he had a very keen sense of iconography and a very keen sense of the dream image. There's this definite connection, I think, with the surrealist history, the surrealist school of thought in film and art and all that. And I was just reading an article that I thought of you because there was a reference on one of the films. There's a critique. I can't remember which film it was that talked about how he was. It was very clearly influenced by Maya Deren's Meshes of the Afternoon, which is a short avant-garde film that we all saw in film class in college, and it was very much about this juxtaposition of dream imagery. That of course, Maya Deren, known for her anthropology and the voodoo stuff that she did. That
Yeah, she was a Mambo priestess. She had
right.
initiations. Yeah, that was her thing.
And you talked about obviously how she influenced you, and when you were making your films about about ritual and water and all that. So there's this sense of the surreal that, to me, when I was looking at the whole of Lynch's work, I was seeing this pattern of, like you said, about how he asks more questions. He doesn't answer the questions, and he famously in interviews refuses to offer interpretations. Like most artists, they want their audience to interpret themselves, and they don't have they don't want to have any say in that. So he asks more and more questions, like you said. But the experience of being in a Lynch being in a Lynch film, which is funny because I was thinking, like, there's this kind of, I don't know what you call it, a meme, or like, but like the idea that we're all living in a Lynch film, because
Oh
we
yeah,
have
they
these.
sell those little stickers like you
Right,
can put directed by David Lynch on your window and then
right,
everything you see, right, makes sense
right.
or doesn't
And
make sense, but it's okay.
right, and because reality is so unexplainable in some ways, and I think that's one of those notions that I think doesn't get enough attention paid to it. That reality is really weird and unexplainable, and it's not like narrative at all. It's not like, life isn't a complete story. Life is a Mobius strip of things that just feeding on each other. And so this idea of watching a Lynch film is like being, as you said, in that liminal space, and it's an initiatory experience. And I think things like Twin Peaks kind of like lampshades that a bit and says, oh yeah, this is all part of the initiation. You're going to find yourself in that lodge sooner or later, right? So I want to get into that a little bit more later, but yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said about Lynch's approach being occult in the sense of initiatory, and through that dream imagery, through that surrealism, through that Jungian collective unconscious. That's something that we all are a part of, but he invites us to go deeper and darker into that unknown.
It almost, in a way, reminds me of some of Artaud's work because he's got that shock value, right? Like you pull back that curtain and you know you're going into the Black Lodge, but is it going to be the little person? Is it going to be Laura Palmer in an evening gown? Is it going to be a tree with an arm on it? Like you don't know what's going to happen. And that's the beauty of it. It's continually shocking you into this different space, which for me is what parallels initiation, right? You're having these experiences that are so fantastic and you don't know what's going to happen, and everything and nothing happens at the same time. There's this divine stillness, this sort of, sublime portal that we're allowed to access these other realms and have those visions and those experiences, even if part of us is in the Black Lodge, part of us is still back there, right? And we see that with Cooper being in these different spaces and being different characters and being different people. And it's so beautiful because I think it's not just life that's like that. It's even more so for me, memory that's like that, and understanding these things about like, oh, what do I remember? Do I remember the first time I saw a Lynch film? Yes, I do. But do I also remember, being somewhere with someone who was complaining about this makes no sense, turn it off? Like it's all of those things simultaneously. And then I throw them out of the house, right? Like, so it's all those things. And it was really interesting to me because as soon as he died, my phone went off like crazy. Everybody had to tell me, right? Like, and the only other time I can remember that happening is when Prince died, because everybody knew I was going to be devastated, right? Like, so this is somebody who's meant so much to me in so many different ways. And really, I think for me as both a filmmaker and a magical person and a storyteller, validated me, right? Like if I can point to Lynch saying that time is not linear and space is not, what we think it is, then I can see that in my own work, which is what I was trying to do, and sort of say, well, he did it, so, shut your pie hole about it. Ha ha. There's my pie
Yeah,
joke.
Yeah, I was thinking we need to have pie to celebrate. But yeah, I mean, what you described is also, it also made me think of, Holy Mountain and
Yes.
Jodorowsky, just that kind of that imagery that's constantly assaulting you, and you're not sure what the context is, and in some cases you never know what that is, and so you kind of have to put it together yourself, and which is like the in so many ways like the shamanic or initiatory experience, right? So I think there's a deep understanding there, and with the lodge setup itself. I mean, we think about Twin Peaks, in the early '90s, and it's funny because I've been on this early '90s kick recently, rewatching Northern Exposure, which was one of my favorite shows at that time, and then like X Files, of course, was starting around then too, and X Files clearly hugely influenced by Lynch, and so
I
you
mean,
have
David
this.
Duchovny in drag. Come on.
Right, right. But I mean, just
Denise.
when I think of like some of those episodes, like the episode with Gillian Anderson's, like I think she was directing it and she used like Moby's music. It was very much like a Twin Peaks episode. But there was a sense in the '90s of discovery of the other, that kind of really putting forth that sort of it doesn't really hold up these days, but that kind of vaguely Native American mythos, that was creeping its way into the mainstream entertainment. So you had Hawk on Twin Peaks explaining all these vaguely Native American stories and how that relates to the Black Lodge and the White Lodge. But then when you look at the design of the lodge itself with the red curtains, which we see in other movies, um, there are red curtains in Mulholland Drive, and I think in Blue Velvet too. Um, and you have that zigzag black and white floor,
Yeah, the
which some
chevron floor. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
and some people have noted that that's clearly a Masonic reference, or that or at least that's taking part in that same kind of current of the balancing of the balancing of powers on the Masonic black and white checkerboard floor in the temple. So there's clearly, and the red curtains, that does have a very Masonic feel to it. So there's clearly something going on there that connects to occult history that he's playing on in Twin Peaks.
I think it's interesting you mentioned Hodorowski, because we know Hodorowski has done so much with tarot. And I mentioned to you before we started, these don't exist as a set. The person was selling them as individual cards or prints of the whole thing. But this is the limited edition Twin Peaks Tarot series. So for me, the two that I love the most are Kyle MacLachlan. Agent Cooper is the magician, and the log lady is the high priestess. And I just think it is archetypal, right? You mentioned Jung and all of those archetypes, and it's just so beautiful to me that oh look, it's Dr. Jacoby as the hanged man. Like, it's just so good. His cast, like, I couldn't, there were people in it that I had, Piper Laurie and Joan Chen, and there were so many people in all of his films, Isabella Rossellini, that were iconic figures, and for me, it just made it all the more intense and phenomenal to have them in partnership with this fantastic director. It was just the better than you could imagine, right? All of these things coming together and layering together on top of each other to make such a beautiful end result. That's
So
beautiful.
yeah, last night for the first time in a long time, I started to rewatch Twin Peaks, and just even in that pilot, and before the even gets to the weird stuff, it's there's so much about those, as you mentioned before, those iconic shots, like that stairwell shot, the ceiling fan, or the close up of the motorcycle and Laura Palmer's eye on that video, which of course you couldn't get that close on a real videotape, um, but just all these characters, and and of course everyone's having secret affairs, And so it is kind of like a soap opera in a lot of ways, but there's definitely, you know, all of Lynch's stuff, especially this and Blue Velvet. It's really about that, as you know, a lot of people have said, that undercurrent, that underbelly of darkness within the suburban happy life, right? And so yeah, and the Log Lady is such a incredible uh, character, and portrayed by a woman who I remember reading this, that it was um, Catherine Coulson, who I believe was one of Lynch's first benefactors. Like, she was a waitress who believed in him as an artist and gave him money to help, you know, make Eraserhead. So there's this whole history, you know, in the Log Lady herself, outside of just even the story, which is just also a great story about her too in the show. But so there, it's all about these quirky characters, right?
I love the Log Lady. I was the Log Lady one year for Halloween, which was great. I just took the kids trick or treating. I put on my grandmother's sweater and carried a log around. Only
There you
one
go.
person knew who I was. It was great, though. So, you know, you're talking about the undercurrent. So, here to go with my pun again. The falls. We keep coming back to the falls, right? And I write in my Water Magic book, I write about their Snoqualmie Falls in Washington State, and how, like, a lot of indigenous traditions surrounding the falls, there were maidens that died there, and it's a site of, you know, so here we've got Laura, another maiden that's died at the site of the falls, you know, this kind of hearkening to something much older. So we're not even sure where we are in time and space. And that was one of the beautiful things to me with the reboot, because, you know, in the original, they talked about 25 years, you know, everything's going to come back in style. So we got it 25 years later, and all of us fans were like, okay, if we wait another 25 years, maybe there'll be some more. So,
That Cody
um,
like, he's gonna come back in style.
yes, it is going to come back in style. And
And
I think more people, you mentioned your daughter, you know, sort of discovering it for the first time. My daughter loves it. I think we're going to see these younger generations coming to it and really understanding and appreciating it in a new way, because they have the tools. They have the tools to process something that's not a linear story, or that's not located in time and space, because it's a different world now, right? Like, time and space doesn't mean what it did because of the internet, because of all of the things that are happening now. So they've got a different understanding, different eyes with which to look at it with. And I think that's beautiful.
yeah, I think there's, I mean, there's definitely something to be said about the Lynchian influence that's pretty prominent in things like anime. A lot of the things that like my daughter would watch, there's definitely this, as you said, that there's much more of a non-linear storytelling that they use, that, you know, it's not just Lynch, but it goes back to that, and creates these narratives that, you know, people from our generation wouldn't necessarily be able to follow. And I'm not an anime fan myself, but I know that there's a lot of stuff that they watch that's really, you know, there's some similarities there.
Definitely. I did also want to mention the much forgotten Lynch sitcom on the air that was absolutely amazing. If you haven't sought it out, go and find it. They had paid for 7 episodes, I think, and they only made 3 of them. I was looking for them on YouTube before we got on. There's bits and pieces of it that you can see. It's slapstick. It's ridiculous. It's got Hatchet Face from John Waters' Crybaby in it. It's got like all of these, like, sort of, again, iconic actors. It's got the Larry, Daryl, and Daryl guy in it as Blinky, the one who can't work the light board. It's about all these things that go wrong on a television show. And wow, it doesn't. You said to me, is it magical? I said, it's not magical, but anybody who's ever been in a production or tried to organize a production will really appreciate it, because everything that can go wrong does, in such a weird Lynch way that I mean, honestly, I was rewatching the clips and my stomach hurts from laughing so much just from looking at the clips that I've seen a million times, you know. So seek it out, find it if you can. I do. If anybody's personal friends with me, I do have them. I taped them. I saved them from back in the 90s and transferred them to DVD. So yeah, it's definitely worth watching. Hopefully now, Criterion will start releasing some of these things. They had a beautiful tribute to Lynch on their site. They have released all of his films from what I could see on their site. So
Well, he did so much, short films. Like there's a whole list of short films that he did that showed up in weird places and film festivals and things like that. But yeah, like I probably had Twin Peaks on a VHS somewhere. Back when we were recording it. Um, but yeah, there's so much that you could look to, and I'm kind of excited to go back and rewatch some of this stuff and get the stuff that I haven't watched. I didn't see the Twin Peaks revival yet, and really even back in the day, I wasn't I didn't I don't even think I saw the entirety of Twin Peaks because I was in college and I wasn't watching a lot of TV back then. I saw prominent episodes and I know what went on, and I saw Fire Walk with Me and all that. But I'm kind of looking forward to getting into this rewatch. Like I said, we're doing this '90s thing where we're watching Northern Exposure, we're watching Babylon 5 because I'd never seen Babylon 5 before. Um, but yeah, there's that when you look at what an impact that it had on pop culture, and as far as I can recall, after Star Trek, it was probably one of the first things I'd ever seen that had academic work written about it, like an anthology of essays. It was basically Trek, Twin Peaks, then X Files, then Buffy. There was I want to say there was a book called Saucerful of not Saucerful, that's Pink Floyd. Um, Full of Secrets or something like that. It was an anthology of academic essays on Twin Peaks, and so it just the impact it had was just huge at the time and now. And there was even a point where I think one of the early seasons of Northern Exposure, there's actually a Twin Peaks parody that happens on one of the episodes when they go to they see a waterfall, and it's like it starts to slow down. You start hearing the do 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 do. That's the other thing too is like when we think about like last yesterday when I found out the news, and I immediately started listening to some Julie Cruz and getting out those emotions. Because you can't really think about his his movies and his TV shows without thinking about the music.
Yes.
The Badalamenti soundtrack, the Julie Cruz singing, or even what Trent Reznor did with Lost Highway. There's so much about his films, and like Blue Velvet, singing, Dean Stockwell's lip syncing in Dreams. Like you can't come up with a more classic scene than that, and the way that he would take not just the dreamy weird music, but like American classics, and put them in a context where you're automatically thinking what's the trick here, because there's a surreality to it, like something as popular as a Roy Orbison song, but making it weird because it's about our dreams. It's about what's going on in our unconscious life. That is the unconscious life of our society. So there's just so much with the music, I think, that needs to be said.
No, I think it's the same thing operating with the casting. I was talking about Russ Tamblyn and Harry Dean Stanton and Piper Laurie, these figures that a lot of us grew up with in classic TV and film that mean something else for us. And now they're in this weird Lynch verse where all these strange things are happening, and it's beautiful. I just love it. It's like he brings us there with old friends, and he puts a soundtrack to it that transports us to another realm, and he gives us visuals that are so, like, I don't know, life altering almost, in a way. Like I will forever have that image of the waving red curtains in my head, walking into the Black Lodge, or so many of those scenes, Cooper in front of the mirror. And other people had done it before, and other people have done it since. And honestly, I don't think anybody's done it as well, ever, ever. This kind of, parallel universe, who am I kind of situation. That's just beautiful.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Mark Frost, his co-creator for Twin Peaks and several other things, he wrote this on Blue Sky because that's where we all are now. Thanks for all your kind remembrances on this awful day. Words will come later. Only feelings at the moment. Mourn and remember him, but don't forget to celebrate too. We won't see his like again. The man from another place has gone home. I know. I just thought that was so beautiful. I was like, oh, yeah, we're not going to see it again. We're not going to see anybody who has all of those things that he did and was just so weird and so wonderful. And I thank him. I'm going to have some pie and coffee later and rewatch all the things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we will not see his like again. Indeed, I mean, it's when we think of these cultural icons that there's this nobody like, and I think of Bowie, and I think of Lynch, and there's maybe a few others in that pantheon, but it's there's no comparison with anyone, um, and they changed our world. They made our world, our inner world, and outer world to a certain degree, what it is, and we can't say enough about it. For our tribute episode of the Pop Culture Show here on this January evening.
Yeah, and don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. I think we finally got enough users now that we're getting some sort of, what do you call it, analytics back, so I know where you're watching and how you're watching, and thank you, everyone. And we also have a Patreon.
Well, we put deleted scenes and extra material on there, and just fun stuff that we do, and that's at www.patreon.com/popacultureshow. So join us there, and every other week on the tubes of you.
Yes, all the things. Keep watching, and if there's probably some you missed, go back and watch those too. So thank you. We really appreciate you, and have your own coffee and pie and a little something something for David Lynch.
Cherry pie and a damn fine cup of coffee.
That's it.